Welcome. Welcome everybody at home. I'm going to talk a little bit tonight before we meditate. I want to reflect and then meditate on the other side of the coin that I've mostly been talking about, and that I feel like the world is quite focused on for good reasons. We've been focusing a lot on suffering. There's a lot of suffering happening. There's always been a lot of suffering happening, but right now it seems painfully prevalent in our lives with the pandemic situation and the social political awareness being raised around race and inequality and injustice and political idiocy and confusion and so I want to acknowledge the suffering. I want to acknowledge that the Buddha's first truth is to acknowledge suffering. But tonight I want to talk about the opposite of suffering, and not just the opposite of suffering in the form of nirvana or non-suffering. I'm going to ask my neighbor to quiet down those tenants. But to talk about joy and happiness and appreciation and gratitude and the importance of positivity and of appreciation, and that ability that we have. Like, we learned this in mindfulness, and for me it was like the biggest revelation of my life when I realized I could choose what I pay attention to. Before meditation, I paid attention to my mind and obeyed my mind, and mostly my mind was pretty negative and craving and aversion and judgment and fear and self-centeredness and addiction. And then I realized, they told me to pay attention to my breath. Wow, I can actually shift from future, past, fear to body, present. So you all know that, right? You can choose what you pay attention to. We have some, not total ability, not total control, but we have some influence over what we focus on. And whether we're doing that in mindfulness and we're focusing on the body, breathing, or the four foundations, it's all choosing. Okay, I'm going to choose the body. I'm going to choose the feeling tones. I'm going to choose the mind. I'm going to focus. I'm going to observe thoughts arising and passing. And then we begin to develop some intimacy with what's happening in our minds and in our hearts. And we can start to choose, I can disengage from those suffering-causing thoughts, the greed, the hatred, the delusion. And we can start to cultivate and focus on the more positive thoughts when kindness arises, love, compassion, forgiveness. And you can choose, I'm going to pay attention to those thoughts when the mind occasionally gives us good advice of, let me put my attention on that arising of a wholesome emotion or a kind thought. Make sense so far? What are we paying attention to? We're always paying, as they say, we're always paying attention to something. But where are we giving our attention? Where are we focusing our attention? So I want to talk about focusing our attention on pleasure, on beauty, on happiness, on joy, on what we appreciate, what we're thankful for, what we enjoy. And this is pretty, I think it's pretty radical, because it's not how we're wired for the most part. Our survival instinct is wired to look at what's wrong, what's threatening you, what's hurting you, what's wrong with this picture. Feels a bit more natural to worry and focus on what's wrong. Does it take much effort to focus on what's wrong, or does that come naturally to you? Welcome. To me, it's quite natural to focus on what's unpleasant and to be kind of over and over my attention drawn to what's painful. It's one of the reasons why we watch the news and are so drawn into the news and are so drawn into social media's, political. I mean, you just think about your relationship if you look at Twitter or if you look at Facebook, or do you really, stop and really hang out with the positive posts? You're like, wow, let me really read all of the comments on this celebration, Or is it the negative ones, the ones that feel like something painful here? Let me really dig into it. There's some corruption, some ignorance, some injustice, some suffering. The Buddhist does say that we have personality types that in some way we're born with. We have a karmic tendency towards personality types, and that some of our personality types, our tendency is hyper focused on aversive. That's called an aversive personality. And that you're just kind of, your default is kind of negativity and aversion. What's wrong? First, one of the ways they say you diagnose yourself is when you walk into the room, do you first notice what you don't like about the space? Especially if you have some anxiousness, some social anxiety, some, first you go like, oh man, this carpet is dirty. When's Noah gonna vacuum? Or do you, or the flip side, which is the what's called the desire type, or the greed personality, that first looks at like, oh no, first you notice like, oh, I like the art, or and then later you might notice that the carpet's dirty, but it's not the first thing you notice. But first you notice, these luxury meditation cushions. Those are nice. I like those. Leather top, unless you're vegan, then you're like, fuck these leather topped meditation cushions. They look cool, but this is bullshit. Not sitting on that cow's ass. The third personality tendency is called deluded, where maybe you're not so hyper critical or desire based, maybe a little bit more spaced out. Didn't even notice the meditation cushions or the dirty carpet or the art until I mentioned it. So I want to talk about joy, and I want to meditate on happiness and on joy and on gratitude, which is pretty, I think pretty challenging. It's much easier for me to sit here and say like, yeah, let's turn towards the pain. Let's turn towards the suffering. That feels a bit more natural to me and natural to even though I'm a greed personality type, my type is like desire, and I walk in and I see what I like and I want it. You know, I'm not super aversive by nature. But you just can't help but look at this world and feel pretty aversive to the massive ignorance and to feel compassionate for the massive suffering that's happening. As most of you know, I work as a counselor, talking to people, one-on-one therapeutic counseling, and so, you know, getting not only from my friends and people that I'm around, but from clients, getting the reports of how difficult it is for most people to be in the midst of a pandemic and stuck at home more and not having the usual social outlets and opportunities to be of service and fun and work. And, you know, people miss working that aren't working. I've sort of heard that over and over from people who are like, it was so great, I wasn't working, and it was fun for like a month, and then like it really sucks to not be working. Even though some people are making more money on unemployment than they were working, they're like, I've got enough money, but I'm just miserable. And then there's the people that don't have enough money and are also miserable. And then I guess some people have enough money and they're happy. So the importance of joy. It's one of the Brahma Viharas. The Buddha said, when I woke up, when I got free, all that remained in my sort of response to the world was kindness, loving kindness, metta, unconditional friendliness. That I just felt a sense of, may all beings be at ease. It just came natural when there was no more clinging and aversion and self-centeredness. There was just this universal, altruistic friendliness. He said, and also compassion. I just had compassion for all of the pain, all of the suffering, all of the ignorance on both sides, the oppressors and the oppressed. Just compassion for the confusion that creates oppression and for the suffering of being in the midst of oppression. Compassion. He said, and joy. He said, and I looked out at this world and I experienced this world with a feeling of empathizing and enjoying how much beauty, how much happiness, how much joy is on this planet. And we talk so much about, and I'm guilty of this, and Buddhists are guilty of this, we talk so much about suffering. This is the first noble truth, suffering. We start with suffering. We keep talking about suffering. And then we talk about the end of suffering. And then, you know, some Buddhists, I'm probably guilty of this too sometimes, you know, just talk about the end of suffering as just being such a relief that you're not suffering anymore. But we don't often talk about how much joy there is, how much fun it is to be alive at times, how much pleasure, appropriate, wonderful, pleasant experiences we can have. I find it so important to have fun, to be playful, to be silly, to be joyous, to laugh at my own, and even just to have a sense of humor about our own ludicrous inner critic. How ludicrous our own judgments are so often. And if we can start to develop a sense of joy and a sense of humor about our own minds, how much less would you suffer if you could laugh at yourself more often rather than be so tight and so spiritual? Nothing worse than hanging out with spiritual people that are uptight about it and using it as a form of judgment. I don't know if anybody's said it to you yet, but at some point, someone will try to insult you by saying, that wasn't very Buddhist. Or, the precepts police, that was wrong speech. We're gossiping. We can't gossip. And, sometimes we could do those, Sangha, I'm going a little too far with it. There is an appropriate way to hold each other accountable and to call each other out and to, call each other into the integrity that we all are aspiring to have. But also the importance of being, lightening up a bit. Even this whole enlightenment business. You can get so heavy about enlightenment. You can get so dour. Just meditating my ass off, just so dour. I'll get enlightened. When I was in teacher training, Cornfield, who I was doing training with, he asked us this question. He said, what's missing from Buddhism that's important to you? Think about that. For you, I'm asking you. He asked me, I'll tell you what I said, and some of you have heard me say this before, but is anything missing? Is Buddhism perfect? Does it address every aspect of your life? Or is there anything that's important to you that's not clearly taught? You can say it, Ron, yeah.
If I look at the sutra in the teaching, I've never read what did this man do to have fun.
Right.
I'm talking about mindfulness, constant.
Yeah.
How did he zone out?
Right. My answer was something like that too. It wasn't so much about have fun, but it was humor. That's one of the things I said. I said two things. I said, it feels like there. I don't see. It's hard to read. It's hard to read the suttas, anyways. But there's nowhere that it's obvious that like this is a joke. Although some Buddhist scholars say, actually, when you really get a sense of the early literature, that you see that some of the analogies that he's using are funny, and that he is sort of like being facetious or making fun of that there is a sense of humor in some of it, which is quite hard to parse out from my experience, but that there's some fun in there. The other thing that I said, not tonight's topic, was the importance of making direct amends and asking for forgiveness. Not just this perspective of you have the karma from your actions and you will experience that karma, but the actual going forth and apologizing and making direct amends when we've caused harm. And of course, that's a 12-step recovery conditioning, but something very important that isn't important for me in my life, that isn't in Buddhism. Please, one.
One thing that it really wasn't my observation. I mean, I did note something the first time I went through the Satipatthana Sutta. Of course, there's the common misunderstanding when someone starts thinking that data means feelings, means emotions, and it's not. That's feeling tone. And then you notice, as I think Dave used to point out a lot, is that the chapter on chitta, on heart mind, on where we put our thoughts and our emotions, is really fucking thin. And that, it's not surprising to me to see people who have trained in the Western convert community, primarily in the Theravada tradition, start looking to the Tibetan tradition, particularly for working and transforming emotions. And I see that trend really clearly now.
Yeah.
That people are glomming onto that side of it with all the visualizations and stuff, which might seem anathema if you come from a more of a traditional Theravada approach. But what I'm trying to get at is mechanisms to work specifically about the way that the Theravada tradition, which is primarily Burmese insight in this country, is taught here. There seems to be a lack in mechanisms to work with difficult afflictive emotions. other than put it aside.
Well,
Put it
yeah.
aside. Put it aside.
How about the Brahma Viharas?
The Brahma Viharas are cultivating that positive mind state. It's trying to help you, but it's not quite getting into with all the mechanics that we learn to deal with thought, with negative thought. That's very clearly laid out.
Yeah.
But in working with really strong afflictive emotions, which could be trauma-based, which could be so subsurface that it's hard to get at, but it seems to be something that's a little missing there. I'm not saying that I'm not trying to discount them.
No, could be.
They are definitely toward inclining the mind as opposed to wrestling with the mechanics of
responding.
Right.
Yeah.
That's why I see a lot of people like scurrying over to some of what the Tibetan people do. Part of it is because of the heavy duty concentration, which maybe they're just looking to bliss out.
Right.
Which might be a form of bypass. But then just to work with it. But then, of course, when you go in the Tibetan tradition with that, then you've got all those, like, what is that thing on the wall? Try to become it. What?
Yeah. Become this guy. It does. Yeah, no, it does. It does. And it's part of what, I mean, I feel very much like the Brahma Viharas have transformed my relationship to difficult emotions. I mean, the compassion, the mindfulness of the unpleasant feeling tone, which leads to compassion, the compassion phrases, the loving kindness, not only creating an attitude, but an attitude that now helps me respond to all of the difficult emotions. And also this piece that we're talking about tonight of humor and of happiness and the permission to be happy and to focus on what's right, not just focus on what's wrong, and to focus on what we appreciate and what we enjoy and what we love about existence, and not just what we're trying to avoid. And maybe it's one of the places where some Theravadins would be like, dude, you're getting a little tantric. And some of the, Vajrayana tantrics would be like, you're way too Theravadin. So my own feeling is that I sit in a little bit of the middle. I am very much Theravadin and very much feel like this is the teaching of the Buddha. This is the teaching of the Thai forest tradition. And Ajahn Chah, who's always giggling like the Dalai Lama, who has this sort of joy about him. That's what I want. I want joy. I want to be quick to laugh, fast to smile, easy to be kind and forgiving, and not uptight about anything, but compassionate and engaged and passionate, but also happy. There's that image that I like that comes from Chinese Buddhism and perhaps more a Taoist image of life made up of 10,000 joys and 10,000 sorrows. That there's, and of course we have to focus on the sorrow and learn to be compassionate for the sorrow and to feel it and stop running from it, and but also we need to learn to feel the joys and appreciate them. And there's this whole other thing that has happened in New Age spirituality where people get so focused on chasing the joy that's a problem too. People started talking about toxic positivity. You're so fucking toxic. I mean, you're so fucking positive. Everything, it's all good all of the time is a lie. It's delusion. So, of course, that's why I wanted to start by acknowledging lots of suffering. And most of the conversation we have here is about turning towards the suffering, but also lots of joy to be experienced. I'll take a couple more comments and then we'll meditate. So Judy, go ahead. And then if you have a comment at home and you want to jump in or a question about this, feel free to raise your hand. Judy,
This is
please.
really interesting you brought this up, because Selma and I were just talking about this last week, about how often we have trouble giving ourselves permission to be happy, and that you go to Dharma talks and it's always about the suffering. It's never about turning towards joy. It's never about how do you give yourself permission to be happy. And we just talked about this for like hours last week. So this is great. I really appreciate this. The permission to be happy. It's difficult for some of us.
Yeah. So I have to admit that in the Brahma Viharas, the Buddha mostly talked about enjoying other people's happiness. It's actually called sympathetic or empathetic joy, of taking our taking pleasure in other people's happiness. Rather, the opposite of jealousy and envy and feeling threatened by other people's success or happiness, which is very, right? Even if that is huge. Imagine how, and it's difficult because then we have to look at appreciating other people's happiness that is well earned. Because we're not saying appreciate the happiness of people who are, gaining it through unskillful means. Like, we're not saying like, yeah, let's really celebrate the billionaires who are destroying the planet and hoarding wealth. Like, yay, billionaires. Not what we're saying, not what we're saying, but that happiness that is well earned, the spiritual transformation that people are going through, the recovery that people are experiencing, the laughter, the love, the connections, the healthy, well-earned forms of happiness. Sometimes our world is so material that we get so focused on, the Fortune 500 and the, who's got the most money. And of course, it's just not a sign of happiness.
But I think if you look at his teaching, even the Quran or Bible, these are 3,000-4,000 years ago, historical times. People were living in deep survival. The life has changed in the 20th century.
Yeah.
So they could not relate to that.
Right. To the extreme wealth.
To talk about our idiosyncrasy and share. There's another part of way to live also.
Right.
They were not attuned to that.
Right. Ron's making a comment. I've been asked to repeat what's being said here for the people at home about how all of these ancient religions, whether it's Buddhism or Islam or Christianity, Judaism, are founded in thousands of year old cultures that aren't completely equivalent to what we're experiencing now in this modern capitalist, advertising world. Yeah, not quite the same. But the emotions of human beings, we haven't evolved much. And so hateful and so self-centered. He said, who's going to do this hard work of compassion, of forgiveness, of generosity? Who's going to be willing to go against the stream? One of his last thoughts when he's, and he's talking about his generation as though it's like the lowest degradation of humanity. 2,600 years ago, where people are wandering around meditating naked in the forest seeking enlightenment. And like there's a yoga center on every corner. Just like now. Where I was going, and we will meditate here in a moment, was although the teaching is mostly about enjoying other people, taking pleasure, I very much feel like this is important for us also to develop what's called mudita, appreciation for our own happiness as well as the happiness of others. Not, you know, most of the Brahma Viharas, the practice is all beings. May all beings be happy. Include yourself in that. Important to include ourselves in, it's okay to be happy. Even in this world where there is gross suffering and injustice, it's still okay to be happy, to have fun, to love, to be connected, to be generous, to be. We don't have to, there's this, what I think is sort of a delusional idea of compassion, and a kind of a guilt-based feeling of like, how could I be happy when everyone else is so unhappy? It's like I need to suffer with everyone else. Part of compassion is feeling empathy and care, but it does not, you know, this is the whole Buddhist game, is like, free yourself from suffering for the benefit so that you can be engaged, so that you can be helpful. Suffering with doesn't help, actually. Caring about helps. Engaging helps. So a couple more thoughts. I'll share one piece. I'm not sure how much it totally fits, but maybe it fits in this place of, this is, I'm going to read something from Ajahn Chah where he talks about training the heart. So the heart, the mind, citta, same thing in Buddhism. Knowing that the natural tendency of most of our heart mind is to focus on the pain. What I'm saying tonight is also direct your attention, focus on the pleasure, focus on the joy, focus on happiness. So Ajahn Chah says, listening to your own heart is really very interesting. This untrained heart races around following its own habits. It jumps about excitedly, randomly, because it has never been trained. Train your heart. Buddhist meditation is about the heart. It's about developing the heart or mind. It's about developing your own heart. This is very, very important. Buddhism is the religion of the heart. Only this. One who practices to develop the heart is one who practices Buddhism. This heart of ours lives in a cage. And what's more, there's a raging tiger in that cage. If this maverick heart of ours doesn't get what it wants, it makes trouble. You must discipline it with meditation, with samadhi. This is called training the heart. At the very beginning, the foundation of practice is the establishment of moral discipline, sila. Sila is the training of body and speech. Training in moral discipline can lead to conflict and confusion. When you don't let yourself do what you want to do, there is conflict. The conflict here is that between wisdom and the defilements, and it is also known as the suffering that leads to the end of suffering. This is advice for monks, but listen to it with an open mind. He says, eat little, sleep little, speak little. Whatever your worldly habits may be, lessen them. Go against their power. Don't just do as you like. Don't indulge in your thoughts. Stop this slavish adherence. You must constantly go against the stream of ignorance. You see why I like the guy? I stole all my best lines from Ajahn Chah.